Okay!
First of all, I'm afraid I'm going to have to disappoint. There will be no visuals to this video. Reasons being that originally I actually kind of wanted to make this like last January, but I didn't because I was like, oh, I want to have this big storyboarded video with synced up music and like really got the point across. But eventually I was just like, eh, I don't have the time for that shit hardly anymore. And I'm not that much of an advertiser anyways, so whatever. Second of all, if you're expecting the typical story of, oh, my daddy was mean to me, so I decided that this was bullshit. No, I don't know why I put a southern accent on that, but no, that is not what this is. So, whether you're expecting that because that's just the story you've heard before, or because you want to very easily dismiss everything here because you're just like, oh, but I believe that stuff, so whatever. Sorry, I can't give that excuse. My apologies. You'll probably want to listen to this while playing like CK3 or some shit. I don't know. I am just here to tell a little bit about my experience to dissuade any of you who might have some sympathy for this stuff or might be moving in this direction or sometimes find yourself agreeing. I am not here for someone who's a diehard. I don't talk to brick walls, so, that's not one of my favorite hobbies, so that's not what I'm here for. And more importantly, I'm not here to debunk or debate any of this shit. I am just here talking about my experience and how all of this shit affected me. I might mention why something is stupid as an aside, but that's not the main point. If you actually wanted me to go over a particular point of interest, like from my perspective being on the inside at some point, you would have to ask for that separately and I might talk about it. This is just the overall, fuckery of it. I was born into this. And when I say that, I don't want to give off the visual that you would normally have of like when someone is born into a religious cult where they're basically baptized and inducted into it immediately and it really affects their daily life and it's recited to them every day and they're not allowed to watch SpongeBob. That is not what I grew up with. Unlike the stereotype excuse that people like to give for bad behavior, my parents were incredibly kind people. They were not abusive at all. In fact, my home was really the only safe place I ever had growing up because we moved around a lot for my dad's job. He was very career oriented, and I was also homeschooled mostly for educational reasons. Well, entirely for educational reasons. It had nothing to do with anything cultish. And people tend to talk about how isolating homeschool can be, and it is true. It was a little bit. But I feel like most of that comes from the Christian dimension of it when it happens. Because for me, honestly, I still was able to make good friends. It's just, it was really hard to see them very often because, they're at school and you're not. So the overwhelming intent of how I was raised was that I was to be raised to be a free thinker because both my parents were atheists for different reasons, but both of them were. My mom was raised Catholic, my dad was raised Lutheran. So, because my dad was usually away, I mostly got kind of a Catholic ish upbringing. Obviously, I wasn't religiously Catholic, but I learned a lot of Catholic rules about politeness and stuff like that, which I still kind of follow, just a little bit. Well, at least a few of the oddball rules. My dad came from a poor northern white working class background, and the home life was a struggle. And interestingly enough, my grandfather was a brown shirt back in the 70s. He would end up dying when my dad was a teenager. And between that and then the tensions of the 70s through 90s, where you see the causes of colored people finally gaining public attention from the perspective of someone like my dad and my grandfather, it seemed ridiculous. They worked their asses off to barely make it by every day, and they thought all of this bullshit was ridiculous. Obviously, there's more to it intellectually than that, but you can see how that main centerpiece of the mood of the environment is it's a pretty big centerpiece to the emotional feeling of this feeling cheated. Like, hey, why do these guys get attention but I don't? Right? That doesn't mean it's true at all. It doesn't reflect the reality of the situation at all, but that feeling was there, and it was compounded by the influencers of the age. My grandfather would eventually mostly disconnect from the entire scene, whether there was ever a formal renouncement or not that he ever did, either public or private, I'm not sure. But he did eventually end up having Jewish family friends who would be friends of my father, because they were family friends. Not that he liked them or like was particularly friendly with them, but he didn't hate them either. I have heard some interesting stories, and they definitely seem like they were a very odd family. But my family also can be very odd, so birds of a feather, I guess, right? But after my grandfather's death, when my dad was a teenager, a few years before I was born, I know he always greatly idolized and respected him, despite all the troubles. He was a good guy, with issues, just like anybody, particularly anger issues and ego issues, I guess you could say. In the end, my dad, after starting out as kind of a Green Party progressive, which is also kind of where my mom started, he would end up sticking to fascism after going through many esoteric circles and reading a lot when he was in his adolescent years. He was and always has been very much a bookworm. When I come into the picture in the early to mid 2000s, originally the marriage had a lot of friction before it eventually was able to settle down a little bit after, um, hilariously enough, one of the more innocuous things to ever happen in his life was when he kind of embraced Luciferianism. I mean, that's how I would refer to it. I'm not sure exactly how he'd want me to refer to it, but hilariously enough, it's one of the more positive influences that he's ever had. And it uh, definitely saw his mood improve a lot, and he also got used to, being a father around the time I was entering my double digits. So yeah, Satan did kind of help out the family a little bit. No, it's not Satan, the red demon horns, it's the Lightbringer. All right, I'm being ridiculous. But anyways, so if you know anything about the fascist community today, especially, current context, this definitely is a very oddball story because it is overwhelmingly Christian in America and overwhelmingly incredibly into orthodoxy and just embracing gut instinct and rejecting the mind and blah blah blah. The main thing we shared in common was really what I think is the key most important aspect of fascism, which is the idea of the will as an object of worship in and of itself, which I hate to say it, Christian nationalists, but you do the same thing. You're a bunch of idol worshippers. I mean, I don't know what else you call having to have crosses everywhere, because that's literally an idol. I don't know what to tell you. I never thought I'd see the day I kind of was saying the iconoclast thing, but I'm sorry, it's true. You can have them, just don't freaking put them everywhere, man. Now, how fascism entered my life, basically from the beginning, I think is an amazing cautionary tale to any parent or guardian, regardless what kind of issues you have. That the lesson being monkey see, monkey do. Um, Whether you like it or not, your child will learn from you and imitate you, whether you're consciously teaching them or not. And there is no room to be a hypocrite. There really is not in raising a child. My parents were not hypocrites, not in the slightest, but they did really want me to be free of their own preconceptions and start learning from the ground up on my own, to come to my own conclusions. For my mom, this was a lot easier. She wasn't committed to any particular ideology, but she is right wing, so I learned 90s style color blindness, and I also had a lot of disdain for things like Middle Eastern politics because her main thing was mostly being an atheist. So, I hear about Palestine versus Israel one more time and I'm gonna like puke. I'm just so sick of hearing about it. I'm just like, oh my God, shut up. So, more of a classical isolationist right wing libertarian type of deal. But from my dad, it was inevitable that I was going to absorb fascism because first of all, it was a part of how he expressed himself. It's not like he's gonna bottle himself up around his own kid. That was never his intent. So I was going to absorb it regardless, and I was going to be finding myself taught those lessons about how to treat other people and how he felt the world saw him and valued him was going to reflect onto me as how I thought the world saw me and what I thought the world wanted out of me. Our family also was, because we were such black sheep, even when people just didn't know us at all, we were excluded very regularly and often seen as pests for some reason. And I say for some reason because I genuinely to this day think it just was because we were always strangers, we were always moving everywhere we went, and we were awkward. My dad wasn't. He's a great speaker, but he's also a very serious, monotone kind of guy. So people would respect him, but it didn't earn us any like rep or anything. Like he got a lot of respect at work, and he's a respectable guy, but it didn't exactly get us like family rep or friends or anything. My mother is very shy and she's very genuine, and both of those things combined got her. She's also very nervous in social situations, and those things all combined, we were not winning against any Karens. And being that I was her only son, and she was kind of this youngest sibling runt figure to most people, even people we didn't know, we both regularly got stepped over all the time. And this is especially a prominent factor in my life when I was really young because it made it actually even more difficult when I was like, 4 through 7 than when I got older for me to have any social interaction at all. So my young years were very isolating, even more so than the rest of the time. And we literally would just kind of like get these nasty looks and things like that and just were treated horribly. All of this to say, bringing all of this up to say that this kind of treatment added to the paranoia and the self isolation that fascism asks you to do, to reject the humanity of others, to work only for your own self interest, and to tribalize, to have these really dysfunctional attachment styles that lead you to idolize people who treat you nice for a split second, go back and forth between thinking others are like gods and demons, and just overall unstable relationships. And so all of this context, like how my family kind of ripened as it aged with that kind of treatment, and then everything that happened in the past before I was even born, that's all the context that you could possibly need. And now I can talk a little bit more about my actual experience growing up. I was always really sensitive. Like I would bet money that if someone were to do a brain scan on me, my amygdala would be really tiny. And I think that is a a pretty good 50-50 mix of nature and nurture because I know it's kind of in the family a little bit. I've seen it in others, and then I know that what I went through growing up definitely did not help. This doesn't mean it was visible though, especially when I was really young, because obviously you don't have all that experience under your belt yet when you're, like 5, and also children just don't have the emotional regulatory factors that you gain as you age. So you wouldn't really be able to tell. But even despite that, I was a really cute kid. I was very patient, very kind, very considerate, always paying attention. But it was those youngest years when it was the most of a struggle for my parents to find any other kids for me to be around. Because again, I don't go to school. So they would try their best to find activities, go to the park. And by they, I mean mainly, of course, my mom, because she was the one staying at home with me. And it was not for lack of trying. And there was just no one. No one accepted us when it came to the adults. And then our schedule did not match up with the schedule of any kids at all. I would get taken to the park and there would be nobody there. So I just learned to hang out with trees basically while my mom was hanging out. And it would get even worse when we eventually moved between ages 4 through 7 to a really bad neighborhood. And this would be the reason why I, impressively for the decade, had internet access at the really young age of 6 years old. I have been on the internet continuously since I was 6, and the reason being that every time I went outside, I was like half an inch away from dying, slash, on a nice day, just kind of getting stabbed with tin cans by like 15-year-olds. So that that was a good enough reason to stay inside. But again, my character showed when I was really young, and I was, again, raised by amazing parents, so I was super responsible with my internet. Like, I was a little model of internet safety. Like, I took care of myself. There was like one incident where I saw like fucking Bowser eating Peach or something in some like 2010 video. And after that, I was just like, my little mind was aware that there were things that I didn't want to see, and I was gonna do my best to not peruse such things. Thank you very much. But of course, I wasn't a prude either. I loved finding weird, eccentric stuff. I knew what my limits were, and I was just like, yeah, no. And of course, I wouldn't have any awareness of politics until much later in my life, in which case the internet would come to play a prominent role, but not in the way that you would think. As of the moment, though, there were what I now see as intense foreshadowing of things to come. When we first moved out of that bad neighborhood where we had a lot of bad experiences, some of them being very racially charged. It was not a majority of any demographic neighborhood, by the way. It was a mix of everyone, and everyone there was horrible. But people would sometimes use both progressive and racist causes as excuses to, abuse and attack one another, which is a pretty great example of how those are some pretty trashy things to do, but not the lesson we learned. By the time we finally escaped to the Rockies, which is my true childhood home where I spent my key developmental years, we were now surrounded by a bunch of white Mormons who my parents were a lot more comfortable around overall, but Mormons are not huge fans of outsiders, and we were like the definition of outsider. So we were generally still excluded, but it actually was a lot better for me. I was able to make a lot of friends, and my mom, because all the Mormons, number one, wanted to convert me really bad, and number two, they thought that it must have sucked having such a sinful mother drinking coffee. So I actually got a lot of positive attention. Not that it was always great attention, but like I got a lot of positive attention because people would be like, "Oh, you poor thing," and my mom didn't mind because she's just like, "Well, if that's what it takes for you to be treated all right, then I'm cool with that." So it was for me a pretty great experience. The Karens were a real annoyance, but it was overall a very nice place to live. Around this age, though, is when I have my first memories of listening to white nationalist songs and starting to see the foreshadowing I mentioned earlier coming to light. And this is also when, being that we lived like at a mountaintop, like we weren't in town, we were like on top of the mountain. I still was extremely isolated from everyone. Like, we had a mountain path that I could go visit whenever I wanted right in our backyard, but a lesson I would learn much later in my life is no matter how much I felt like I had to be independent and on my own, the fact is it's really hard to feel motivated to do anything if no one else is involved. Even if you are doing something on your own, you kind of have to pretend like someone else is there, because without anyone else you care about coming with you, I never actually really went out that much. I did absolutely go riding around on a four wheeler at like 35 miles per hour on a rocky ass fucking trail, but that was when I really felt like it, of course. Among the songs that I would start hearing was two that got stuck in my head for the rest of my life. That for a long time I actually had a hard time recalling what they even were. I just had the rhythm stuck in my head. One of them I should actually have still stored on my computer somewhere, so I'll play it if I can. And another song that I cannot find anywhere that I remember very strongly was this song that just was literally repeating the word Deutschland over and over, and it just went, and I hate to imitate it, but I have to. It just went Deutschland, Vaterland, and all this footage of soldiers fighting in Russia or whatever. And I thought this was just like, obviously I didn't think anything of it when I was like dancing to it a little bit when I was really young, like 8 years old. But even later in my life, I just thought it was like German pride music or something, because we were like, I'm German Polish, so I was just like, oh, it's like pride music? Question mark. This is also the time when my personality disorder, which I will not name because fuck no, I'm not going to be responsible for people getting stereotyped as being similar to me. It's bad enough that I'm having my own problems. I don't need other people to get fucking stereotyped. But I started developing my personality disorder around this time, and it mostly revolved around abandonment issues, really severe abandonment issues, and at the time, anger issues. That would eventually change later on, and it would be much more internally focused. But at the time, I fucked up some Wii remotes. I'm not gonna lie. And of course, the internet would become my main source of any companionship, especially Roblox at the time. I miss the gold days of Roblox, but it would eventually, like at the time, again, very innocuous, but it would be my outlet. It would be where I went to, uh, I wouldn't really call it relaxing, just vegetate to try to get my mind off things, to try and find connection. Um, None of these things were ever things I consciously did. I never thought of it as my escape, but that is kind of what it was. This was the time period between 7 to 11 years old when I started really getting introduced to a lot of adult responsibilities and concepts that um, most adults don't really get used to or do that I was doing. Um, One of those things that definitely most adults still can't even handle was matters to do with livestock, which you don't really need me to fill in the gaps there. And then second would be a lot of emotional drama, interpersonal drama. My parents' marriage was still like it wasn't like at risk or anything, but I definitely remembered harder times, and I, being very much a paranoid, emotional kid, took basically any argument, which there were some serious fucking arguments and some serious problems, as being like, oh, I guess everything's over now. Okay. And of course, I would usually blame myself for things totally unrelated to myself. But the main point is that I would actually take it upon myself as though I really was responsible. And I would actually try to intervene in this adult drama where I would actually try to form the communicative bridge between my parents. And this is like 9 years old, 10 years old. I'm trying to like listen to one of them relay to the other something that they never asked me to do, but that I was doing, and it was stressing me the fuck out. And just any kind of yelling stressed me the fuck out. Um, and it was pretty like I took it upon myself to be the emotional crux, and I do remember a few times my mother taking her rage at my dad out on me, where she would yell at me for not being clean or not picking up after myself or something like that, but like very brutally. And it was especially after we had moved out of the previous neighborhood, she was really traumatized. And that happened once every blue moon. She would lash out at me, never violently, just in words, but it would suck a lot. On top of this, I also have always had the attitude, without any conscious thought at this age, that I refuse to ever turn off at any point and just go along with something without feeling it. Does that mean I can be coerced into doing something without thinking about it? Yes, I still can. It doesn't actually stop that. But I would at least make myself feel it the whole time. And this especially came apparent when I was, for the very first time in my life, starting to process easy animals like chickens. Um, and I would refuse not to name them. I was told, don't name them, it will make it harder. And I would name them, knowing that I would have to do something eventually. And over time, no matter, I would do it over and over, until eventually it kind of rubbed me raw. And I you would still name them, but I kind of just didn't really interact or feel as much for them anymore. And it would just kind of rub me raw, and that was very much not a good experience, and it would just get worse as I got older. All of this combined, I very quickly started losing my functional ego, and I just felt like between the things I had to do and who I felt I was, which was someone who did not meet the standards of someone. No one was telling me I wasn't enough, really. At least not at this time. There definitely would be people later, but I just felt like I wasn't smart enough, not strong enough. And then between the things I had to do and the isolation, I just felt like a big fat piece of shit. And this connects to fascism in that one of the key precepts of fascism that I don't think any fascist wants to admit is a part of it, that I think a 9 to 10-year-old could definitely feel and understand, like I did at the time, was the magical thinking which is involved in fascism. Essentially, part of what the willpower doctrine creates is that you gain control in your life, not real control. You gain the feeling of control, which abides that fear of, a lack of control, by taking personal responsibility for everything. And in fact, for the longest time, I couldn't even figure out how you could argue with that point. That just was like an unavoidable, sad reality that I felt most of my life, that I was personally responsible for everything. It felt literally impossible to ignore this supposed reality. If I had to describe the kind of dread that it generates, it's this feeling that you exist and you have absolute free will. Therefore, the fact that you cannot manifest laser eyes to like save a baby from a kidnapping or something is not an absurd statement, but like a genuine lack of goodness in you, that you can't do that. You can't do everything right now. Um, and it doesn't matter if you like are the kind of person who's like, oh, actually it's true, but like it's not like I believe ridiculous stuff like that. No, I know that feeling is there. I fucking had it. I was there. You can't avoid it when you believe in willpower. And so, because of fascism, I took the worst possible approach to what I was experiencing at the time and what I was doing at the time. I just needed to be stronger. That was all that I knew. I just had to be stronger, and the only way to be stronger was to get injured, because what didn't kill you made you stronger, apparently. Uh, Newsflash, that's not what ended up happening, but that's what I thought. Now, once we moved out of that hometown, first of all, my personality disorder would finally really just manifest, both because I was older, my brain was more developed, but also that final, well, not final, there'd be many more to come, but that particular big feeling of leaving everything behind that I had for such a short amount of time it was pretty brutal, moving again. So I would finally start really having some issues, like issues after that. I started destroying random things, lashing out in private, and this was kind of a period where it transitioned from outward anger issues where, like I was destroying random shit when I was a kid just because I got angry at WarioWare or something, to now it was much more serious and deep, and I couldn't lash out anymore because it was too much, so it had to stay facing inwards. After that move is the time when I start meeting really terrible personalities on the internet. And there's this kind of cycle that occurs where, first of all, we're talking about Gmod mostly. Yeah, you don't really need me to elaborate further. Um, but some of those people started off seeming really nice. But what would happen over and over is there would be this cycle where I would create the group. I tended to be much of a very much a leader figure, so I tended to create some kind of group or trend, and then everyone would get sick of me, and then it would be destroyed. And so it was like a pretty regular cycle of abandonment. And that's how it was for me in pretty much anything on the internet for a very long time. Then one much more long-standing group would finally form, and it would end up lasting on and off about like 6 years. It would last for like four in a row, and then it would be on and off the last two. But these people also were actually pretty good friends and really nice for a while. But there was this terrible cycle where we all had our issues with our personality but it was a snowball effect where they would just be terrible people, and I would be okay with it because I was a fascist, and I would also, despite not being a proselytizer, I didn't want to convert anybody. I would piece by piece end up teaching people fascist thought, and it just got worse and worse because then they'd respect me more as like their like sensei, and then I'd teach them more, and we'd do more stupid shit, on and on and on. Not the best. Basically, just made a network of, bullies. What is interesting about it is obviously, from our perspective, and especially mine internally, none of us saw it that way, ever, at all. It was just incredibly tribalistic, and we just didn't really respect or think about other people. We didn't empathize that much. We only were, again, tribalistic internally. That didn't mean everyone was nice to each other. Some people were fucking dicks, but, and like very obviously so from the beginning. But even among those who were like kind of the core of it, um, there were some serious issues that were never addressed. And specifically for me, it was like I would do anything for these people uh, between my bouts of illness, of course, because I could still be an idiot and an asshole. But um, I would do anything. I genuinely saw them as like really good friends who I would stick around for. But eventually, I would get abandoned several times in a row again until the final abandonment, and that sucked. Not that it was entirely one-sided. I also tended to do it the other way around too, to try to take control of the abandonment in a way, I guess. I would just try to do it first. This was also the time of the election, and um I just want to put like raise your hand if you're one of the Murdoch Murdoch kids, cuz I was raised on Murdoch Murdoch when I was like a young teenager, like young. Like it's weird. I genuinely wonder if more than two people see this, will we have like the Murdoch Murdoch kids be getting together? Oh wow, you remember that fucking horrible thing we all heard? Ah, I love that episode. But anyways, um, yeah, that's when I would become politically aware, politically conscious, and I would start watching stuff like that. The thing is calling back to what I said way earlier about how I was with the internet when I was 6 years old. I still was that way, really. It was not the internet that corrupted me, not in my case. It was the people I trusted most introducing me to these things, and then I would go down the rabbit hole. I wouldn't do it on my own. I never would have found fucking Murdoch Murdoch on my own. Never. I never would have found that shit. It was some niche bunch of shitty videos made by some fucking edgy Austrian guy. I wasn't gonna find that shit. But I was introduced to it, and that just made everything worse. Um, Maybe I can try to look back on it as like, well, hey, at least that forced me to confront it later in my life. Maybe if it never came to a head, it never would have stopped. But like, I, I would rather have not seen any of that. So I don't really know. I have mixed opinions. I would also narrow down my interests to biology at this time. Previously, when I was really young, I was really into robots, but I ended up realizing that actually I really preferred biology, and not even in a robotic, mathematical way, but the kind of chaotic, creative, messy, slimy parts of it. I love that shit. And it has a little bit, I've mentioned this in a previous video, it has a little bit to do with the fact that I had StarCraft 2 when I was really young. Still idolize the cowboys in that game. Those are cowboys that I want to be like, but anyways, I mained Zerg, and that's where like half of my personality comes from. And at the time, this is obviously the peak of the there's two sexes shit. Despite the fact that I was still pretty bright back then, even though I wasn't super educated yet in the field, I was pretty smart, pretty into it. I read papers. Somehow, I say somehow just to get intrigue, of course, I was not exactly on board with what scientists were saying half the time because two reasons. Number one, I just kind of wasn't interested in the particular topics that people were into at the time. I wasn't reading papers about gender expression in the animal kingdom at all exactly. So I would hear people say, "Oh, it's flexible," and I'd just be like, the standard argument I've heard from some people at the time, a little more sophisticated than the "there's only two genders" one, is, oh well, everything that isn't one of those two is just a mutant, just useless, which is honestly even more horrific because now we're just like, oh, well, okay, actually, they're both the same. Just one of them is more explicit. So never mind. I take back what I was about to say. But anyways, the second thing was even when I saw evidence to the contrary, like I would actually see as I was learning how truly surface level sexual expression actually is in like animals in general. Like its expression is actually very surface level. It's not that deeply ingrained despite how old it is. And seeing the evidence in other animals, moving past the really fucking stupid "we're not clownfish" straw man, I still refuse to really accept it because in my mind that just wasn't how it's supposed to be. It's not as strong as the Iron Man that we're trying to build. That is the willpower doctrine to a T. That is how you get tricked into genuinely doing some Orwellian shit. It's not just doublethink. It's not just like thought being corrupted. It's emotion being used. I hate to fucking say it, but Star Wars was right, despite how I'm not a Star Wars fan and I kind of hate it. Unfortunately, it was fucking right. The motherfuckers. It's almost like people have learned this lesson before. Crazy. But I genuinely would think to myself, well, it's weaker and it's not war suited. It's just it's bad. We don't want it to be that way. Even if it is that way, we will it into not being that way. It is not the will. That is the freaky shit about fascism. That is what unites it. I've heard people quote the term epigenetic ultranationalism quite often, especially right after I left the whole scene. Not that that was like happened at any particular moment, but you know what I mean. And I never felt satisfied with that because I was like, okay, you described Nazism and like a lot of American nationalisms, but that just being from it, being so deep in the intellectual part. Like I was really a philosopher when I was young. Not a good one, a right-wing one, but I was one. And I don't think that's satisfactory to me. It is all about the willpower doctrine to me. That is what I learned after my experience. That is the shit that causes the major fucking problems and also is the main uniting factor. It's the main thing people are thinking of when they're thinking of people in jackboots. This would also be when I had my first crush. Well, first real crush. I technically had another one when I was a little bit younger, but it wasn't serious. It was just weird, weird shit. But anyways, this was my first real crush on a backdoor neighbor, and at the time, I all it really did, I didn't ever really act on that crush besides just like really wanting to hang out with them. And oh wow, did it demonstrate how out of touch I already was at like 12 years old. I still remember them bringing out some like stuff for us to play with, and I was like, "You play with toys and stuff? What?" Like I genuinely acted like I was a fucking 30-year-old. But really, all this crush did was it made me judge myself even harder. And boy, did my disorder get obvious at this time. I would not find out what it was for a long time, but oh my, it was ridiculous. There would be family drama still at this time, but there was no. I got a break from rural type stuff for a little bit, but we only had that break for a little while. Basically, the election happened, and then we moved again. We would now resume that stuff though once we were in our new house, which is actually the longest house I ever lived in when I still lived with my parents. And our family, well, my dad and therefore our family, started actively getting involved in local fascist politics and activities, book distributions, book runs, hanging out with the scene, talking to people, inviting them to our home, having cookouts, things like that. I did come to know, just for an example of how bizarre my life has been, I personally met Gerhard Loch several times. And to this day, I'm not really sure exactly what his deal was. He's a he's a silly Billy, but that is not the phrase I should use to describe him. But early on when we moved there, I would also meet one of the first young fascists that I'd ever come to meet, someone who wasn't middle aged, and that would be Dan Cleve. If you're from the state, you may know him, and I have so many stories I could tell about this guy. I if anyone is curious, I don't have like that many crazy things or facts about him, but it's enough that it's pretty funny. So if anyone wants some sauce, just let me know. But I don't think anyone will, because this shit's like what, like fucking 10 years old now. But anyways, there was a point where the local sports team had literally had like a little T-shirt campaign, like a little T-shirt drive against him, where they were, pissed that he was making the local campus a little bit more freaky. And so I go to one of the sports I was trying out at the time, and all the people there, well, not all the people, but a couple people there are wearing the shirt. And I like think my dad was either there or I told him about it. And we're both just like, wow, I can't believe they started this bullying campaign against one guy. He's so outnumbered. This is another part of fascist logic, which is teammates and feelings first. The dude got our sympathy because he was outnumbered and we knew him. It was literally, we like the little dog because he's the little dog. The guy was a moron and sexually harassed people and was a misogynist and said horrible shit. Um, but I mean, we were already cool with that stuff, so it was whatever. But to anyone else, it's very obvious that he does not deserve or get the little dog treatment versus the big dog. Over this decade of contact, and I really mean like just over this whole decade, very slowly, there would slowly be this disconnect building up between me and the scene where, and really our family in the scene, where we weren't that much into the sexism and the homophobia. Were we still sexist? Yes, but it was the, stereotypical type of sexism where it's like, men and women are just different, uh, yeah, that type of thing. Same thing that most racists do with race, that apparently everyone is just falling for again these days, where it's like, oh, we're just different. It's not like I hate you. It's like, yeah, if you literally refuse to hang around with someone because they're different, I don't know what to call that. And of course, the fact that people cannot distinguish the fact that not explicitly feeling hate towards someone does not make you not racist and not really, you know, act negatively towards someone and hate them in practice. I don't know why this is so hard for people to comprehend. I knew this back then. I knew that we all hated black people. Even when we were talking about, oh, well, we'd rather they just lived on their own and did their own stuff rather than bothered us. I wasn't delusional about the fact that it wasn't still hate. I knew that we didn't like being around our imagination of what a black person was. You know, other people somehow were in denial about this. Others just doubled down and were just like, yeah, just straight up hate them, and we didn't have any problems with those guys. Anyways, that all sidetracks from what I was talking about, which is the growing disconnect that we had with the scene. This is the thing that would, combined with something else I'll mention in a bit, would eventually finally push me out and force me to finally observe and learn a lot of things that I had honestly been wanting to learn and observe for a long time, because I inherently have always been very curious. So, kind of having my curiosity limited this way, even when I wasn't conscious it was happening, was a little jarring, to say the least. Um, but when it came to personal dynamics with the scene, it got more and more annoying. And on top of the uh, strange tolerance of women and homosexuals that we had, um, I also personally had two things going for me. First of all, that because we identified more or less as National Socialists, well, not really. So the term Nazi we avoided because we were like, oh, that's a term that's reserved for the particular political ideology of 1930s Germany. That's dated. This is something new, whatever, right? But really, that's what we were. We were neo-Nazis. And I particularly actually found myself really delving into genuine socialism. Not the kind of like socialist label that they put on themselves to attract left-leaning people to, not mind them that much, but I'm talking like actual economic socialism. And eventually I'd find myself in a place where I was like, I actually genuinely want what's best for white people at the time, right? And I'm like, all this infighting, hating each other, we need to be kind and cooperate, and that's the only way shit's actually going to get done and things are going to get better. That's what I started saying. And meanwhile, this is when the elitists start really coming out of the woodworks, just saying explicitly what they really think. I'm talking the Groypers, Elon fans, everybody. And they come along and they start saying, some white people just aren't as good as other white people. Some people are just traitors and they suck and they're disabled. Fuck them. And this is when a lesson that I could have learned from World War II, if I just thought about it in the right way, would have come in so handy so much earlier. It was never about helping anyone. It was never about the white people that I cared about. It never was. It never fucking was. It was just going to kill. That's all it was going to do. It was killing for any power, for our tribe. And tribe, you'll notice, is an arbitrary term. You can define it to be whoever, and it just shrinks and shrinks until it's just you. This really pushed me over the edge. I was pissed about this. And eventually, this would push me into further uncovering the reality of the world, which is that if everything is as interconnected as I had learned from biology, which it is, then, and of course from just basic physical principles as well, I mean, we do happen to all live under the same atmosphere, then the only way for anyone to be free and to truly be kind and healthy and safe is everyone had to be free. Now, that conclusion on its own doesn't immediately remove racism because you can still be like, some people are different and just kind of need to be separated. But it's a big step to think to yourself that if anyone is a slave, we are all slaves. That was a humongous realization for me that came around the tail end. You'll notice, however, and this is a mistake a lot of people who have never experienced fascism firsthand get caught off guard by. It's something that could easily sweep you off your feet and even maybe leave you convinced, which is that the fascist logic is not even operating on the same values. You notice how we switched from whatever gains power to I want what makes everyone healthy and safe. Those are two completely different, incompatible priorities. You can't argue about that. If someone genuinely believes that everyone is out for themselves and deep down we're all sinful and hate each other, you can't convince them to agree with you until they change their mind on that subject. Till then, you're doing absolutely no good by going, oh, but this option is the one that would actually practically help people, because they're going to say, no, actually it wouldn't. And even if it did, I mean, it's pointless anyways. You'll notice how when I made that switch as well, I skipped over a lot because we were just talking about how I was engrossed in fascism, and then all of a sudden I'm thinking about what's best for white people, how to make everyone safe and healthy, because that is kind of the point of civilization, Mr. Western civilization, bro. And all of a sudden I'm thinking about that. That's my priority, not control, not like personal safety, but our safety and health. What that skips over is all of the personal development, hard thought, and struggle that goes into that change, that learning about myself and learning to come to terms with and control my disorder, which left me incredibly vulnerable to this kind of logic where you distrust everybody and it's a fight for everything. You can imagine how that would sound pretty familiar to me. It's a struggle, it's pain. It took a decade. So, if you're sitting there thinking that you'll be able to change the mind of anyone other than a close family member, and I mean a close family member who also actually respects your opinion, and you don't just go in gun ho saying you're stupid, even then, it's only a chance. If you really want to worry about somebody learning this type of shit, go to someone who isn't in the cult yet. They need to know. They need to be vaccinated against this shit more than someone who is already in a cult, because you're not going to argue them out of it because they didn't think themselves into it. That's not how this works. I would also learn at this time that I could no longer ignore the fact that I wasn't straight. Now, that might sound absurd at first. Wow, another closet who becomes a fascist. That's not what we're talking about. And if that's your immediate thought, I would ask you to seriously reflect for a second. Like, seriously. So let's get to the actual story. So, I have always been really attracted to the feminine in women ever since I was really young. Um, like I like some of my first memories are like I remember when I was like a little kid, like barely speaking English. I remember getting all flustered at seeing this like blonde. What do you call the freaking people on airplanes? Oh my god, I'm stupid. Flight attendant. Jesus, there was like this blonde flight attendant that got me all flustered when I was like a little kid and stuff like that. But that would end up actually being a red herring because in the end, actually, I'm not straight. I'm bi. And a lot more purely bi than I thought I was, because for most of my life, it was I had only ever felt any kind of attraction to women in real life, and like the idea of a not even necessarily effeminate, as I would come to really realize, but just non masculine guy only ever appealed in the form of like art or something. And before we even get to how that developed, I guess the big question is how do you even live like that under fascism? And it's actually really fucking common and really simple. It's a really simple mind trick. You just say, well, you know what? I guess it's just a behavior choice for me, you know, so I'll just be straight. And it didn't really cause me any stress because I had always imagined that the type of personality I wanted in my life as a partner would be on a female, just stereotypically. And we'll get more to that later, because in the end, I didn't turn out to have a partner who was really particularly effeminate at all. Um, but I just stereotypically imagined it was like a feminine woman personality type shit. And I was just like, it didn't cause me any stress because I was bi, like fully bi. It did not bother me to be like, oh no, I'll have to be with women. Oh, jeez. But it was still obviously a part of myself that I had to still say was like bad. Again, not as bad as if I was actually just gay, because then it's like that's a real problem. But over time, I would start to realize that honestly, the reason I only ever felt attraction to women in real life when it came to people I actually saw, and it wasn't terribly often, really, was because I wasn't just bi. I also only had sexual attraction to people I felt like I knew, and that's called demisexuality, which is where you only feel sexual attraction if you're romantically attracted first. And what was happening was I associated those traits that I found romantically appealing with a certain type of appearance, right? And that's why I never found a dude attractive once before I met my boyfriend. Because I just didn't imagine that was what someone could be like. So I was just like, whatever. And that definitely was one of 5 million straws that broke the camel's back. Because you can imagine that having a gay boyfriend who just happens to belong to a demographic that all of the people I know would rather, at bare minimum, shove back into the closet. They wouldn't really mind putting him in a camp. I'm not really into that, so no. And then, of course, being a bisexual and also incredibly eccentric, I had a lot of exposure to the trans community as well. Bad at first because I was just on shitty fucking servers, and those were like the first trans people I ever met. It got better later. Point is, once I knew, like, I definitely didn't feel like bullshit statistics somebody came up with in their bedroom was exactly justification to murder a bunch of people. So, just so you know, we don't tolerate transphobia here. Go away. The final thing that kind of created the last bit of turmoil that really helped push me over the edge to really just uncover all of this stuff was at this time I would be doing processing again, and it was a lot for a long time until eventually something snapped and I couldn't do it anymore. And to this day, I have to do special things to try to avoid remembering it. And I have other traumatic events as well from the time period, unrelated, that I kind of am probably going to be struggling with for a very long time. It's the usual, it'll get better as time goes on, but it's never going to go away type shit. And yeah, that was enough. I had enough at that point of treating myself like that. And, it's not like every day I wake up and I'm like, I'm the best, but things are better. I think that's the most important takeaway. If anyone is watching this and you're genuinely like someone who has these same problems, and yet you're saying to yourself, either A, I can't relate to this, or B, this is bullshit. First of um, all of my experiences are real. I remember seeing tweets back in the day where like, was it Gingerzilla? I can't fucking remember their names, but like one fucking artist was just like, if you say that you used to be a fascist and you became a liberal, then like you never really were a fascist. That's the same fucking shit evangelicals say. Just don't with me. Second, if you're like on the Christian spectrum of fascism, I have nothing to fucking say to you. I don't care what part of the political spectrum you guys come from. You've been threatening to crucify my family since I was a baby. Fuck you. Third of all, uh, I want you to know that things get better. That if you feel these ways sometimes, and if you just feel like things are hopeless, it gets better. It's hard. I'm not lying to you. It's not magic. It's fucking hard ass work. But think of it this way. You've been told your whole life that if you're not struggling, then you're not doing anything worth anyone's time. That's not true. But if you really need to feel like you're truly struggling and working at something, struggle to get better. It might not feel like you can forgive yourself for some things when you start really disavowing them yourself and feeling that guilt. But I want you to know that you should feel guilt, not shame. You're not defined by what happened. And I am speaking again, I want you to know that even if this is a very brief video, well, brief in terms of what I'm talking about, I know what it is like to do horrible things. Very horrible things. And it's possible to forgive yourself. The only way to forgive yourself is to finally, once and for all, really know that it's over and that you will never be that person again. I mean, that's a little bit of a simplification. It's hard there's no one point where all of a sudden you're like, I'll never have a relapse or something. But in your actions, you can stop. It can stop. I promise. Anyways, I'm gonna go take a fucking shower because it's been a day since I took a shower because it's the weekend and I didn't want to and I didn't go anywhere. So I'm gonna go rinse myself off in shitty city piss water. So I will talk to you later. Bye, bitch.
Tough love is a bullshit concept. 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 Tough love is a bullshit in the same crowd you were raised on. I was the type to pretend I didn't want the same demand. 'Cause I watched my idols slowly blow their brains out. Can I do better? It depends. What do you want? I don't think this walk out with. Made a world of what I'm pondering. Wasn't prepared to see the fruit of my hypothesis. And cause it's in the vault, best to tell you why I'm scared. In the finale chapter,